Yeah, and it's not just diseases you need to worry about. There are legal issues. If the guy knows he's the father, if you have intercourse and you get pregnant, then he has parental rights.
Right, and that is the biggest deal.
Welcome to the Dr. Gil Show. This is where we talk about medical matters that matter to you. And remember, you can trust me because I'm a doctor. Our guest today is Mrs. April Yates Rutter, the Executive Director of Missouri Fertility in Columbia, Missouri. Welcome to the show, April.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
What a wonderful pleasure it is to talk to you about this important topic. What I'd like to talk about today is non-traditional reproduction. And what I mean by that is that the traditional way of reproduction, let's just use this typical example, boy and girl fall in love, they get married, they start wanting to start a family. And if everything's working properly, she gets pregnant, has all the kids, they live in the house, the white picket fence, the whole deal we were all familiar with. But in this world, that's not always the case. That's not always the situation. And as a fertility clinic, we will take all comers essentially in all different situations and help them try to start a family. So we see all these different situations. So maybe you can help me discuss the intricacies and the pitfalls of non-traditional reproduction.
Sure. So families come in all shapes and sizes these days.
Sure do.
So yeah, what we're wanting to discuss is, the non-traditional, such as the single woman who wants to have a baby on her own because she just hasn't found Mr. Right and is sick of waiting on him, or maybe she's just super independent and doesn't want to be in a relationship.
Right.
She's allowed to do that, and she can start a family. That is the beauty of the day and age that we live in. And then you have your same-sex couples, and they're ready to start their family, and they will need some sort of intervention in order to help make that happen. With these non-traditional families come a lot of different heartache and headaches that the traditional family doesn't necessarily have to go through.
Yeah.
There's a lot more considered with donor. You have to get lawyers involved most of the time. So because you're using donor of some sort, whether it's donor eggs, donor sperm, whether it's a surrogate, anytime that you're using a donor, a lot of people get involved, such as the FDA. Yeah,
and the FDA, every state has their own rules, and even international. You do this internationally, now you've got national rules that change. So it's just a minefield. So let's start with what I would call the simplest case. Let's say we have a single woman. We have seen cases where a single woman she's heterosexual. She has a guy who's a friend, and she very nicely asks him, "Hey, do you have any diseases? Are you clean?" The guy goes, "Yeah." "Are you healthy?" "Yeah." She goes, "Will you help get me pregnant?" And they get pregnant the old-fashioned way. And we saw a patient many years ago who did just this, and several days later, she came in with a raging herpes infection that was so bad she had to go to the hospital, have a catheter put in her bladder. She couldn't void, so she got a lot more than she was bargaining for. So that's obviously very dangerous to do it like that on your own, isn't it?
Absolutely. I don't suggest doing something like that. I think that's why we see more and more of these single women reaching out to fertility clinics such as Missouri Fertility and asking them to help them do this in a safe manner that protects them and allows them to still have the family that they want.
Yeah, and it's not just diseases you need to worry about. There are legal issues. If the guy knows he's the father, if you have intercourse and you get pregnant, then he has parental rights.
Right, and that is the biggest deal.
No matter what he says, I won't care, I won't matter. he can change his mind. He sees the kid,
Right.
oh, it's a cute little kid. Well, I want to start coming around.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of cases where, yeah, he said he never wanted to have kids. And so he goes ahead with this and has no intentions of being in this child's life, but then finds out that he can't have kids, and all of a sudden he wants kids, and this is the only kid he could ever have access to. And so
Right.
so now he's changed his mind, and he comes to be in the child's life, and there's nothing legally you can do about it.
Yeah, because there was no contract, there was no written agreement. So it's got a little cloudier here. I know that you can go on various social media meetup sites, and a woman can have a guy not have intercourse with her, but give her sperm, and we'll go to a public place and go in the bathroom, and one way or another, sperm ends up in a diaphragm or a cup, and the woman puts it on there. Thank you very much. Doesn't have to know much about the guy. Really, some guys really enjoy providing this service, but now he knows who she is. He kind of knows who he is, and if she doesn't get any diseases, she still might be pregnant, and she still might have all this legal jeopardy, as will her child.
Absolutely. I think the reason that we're seeing so many of these cases coming to fertility clinics is because they want to protect themselves legally from just those situations. Because, yeah, you want to raise your child, and you have this mindset of, this is what my future with my child's going to be like. And you need to secure that from the very beginning.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't think about down the line. They just think about getting pregnant. They don't think of the ramifications.
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes women will come in and say, hey, I have this guy. I like him for whatever reason. Tall, dark, and handsome, and he's smart and all this kind of stuff, and wants to use his sperm through our services. We need people to understand that we can't use fresh sperm from for anybody but a sexually intimate partner, which is usually a husband. They say, all right, I still want to use this guy. Well, then he has to go through all this special infectious disease testing. He has to have sperm good enough to be frozen and good enough to thaw in enough numbers to be used. And then it has to be quarantined for 6 months until the guy is retested yet again for HIV and hepatitis. So there's this huge cost of doing this. There's the time delay. And unless you have a legal contract where you've specifically said, this is going to be your role, i.e. nothing, then it's still an expense, still a big hassle, and still fraught with possible dangers of the guy, unless you have a contract, the guy changing his mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've told patients that I've talked to in the past is that in using someone, you open yourself up to a lot of liability, to basically, having to tell them what you're wanting and what what your expectations are, and having those expectations not met. And so I think that in those situations, they are wanting to make sure that the best way of being clear about what you expect from someone is to be able to have it be someone that you don't know.
Yes, which is why we strongly recommend we use anonymous donor sperm through a sperm bank.
Right.
It's been tested. The man has been tested not for just infectious diseases, but for genetic diseases and whatnot. We know they have good numbers, and it's clear up front that this was the purpose of the donation. So it's safe, and you generally don't have these donors coming after you because they don't even know who you are. They deposited at the sperm bank, and they are insulated from you in that way. So all of that is taken care of. So for that reason, we strongly recommend using donor sperm from a sperm bank. Now, I need to mention something here. It used to be that they were anonymous. Now sometimes you can get a picture. And now with the advent of home genetic testing, 23andMe Ancestry.com and whatnot. If you are part of that program, you've given your kid gets his samples, or the donor goes in for that testing or whatnot, people can do detective work and link you up. So you thought you were anonymous as a donor or a recipient, and all of a sudden that's unblinded with today's technology.
Absolutely. And that's something that everyone needs to be counseled about. The language is changing. We're not using anonymous anymore. We're using a directed donation or an unidentified donation. So, these are things that have to be relayed to the patient so that they understand what their risks are, so that they know how to counsel their children and when to let them know, or if to let them know that they came from donor. So it is something that is being talked about and debated a great deal in our field right now.
Yes. Now, let's move on to a same-sex female couple. All right. One of the partners wishes to get pregnant. Most of the time they're healthy and can do insemination like anyone else. What type of legal precautions do we have to take now that there are two stakeholders in this relationship?
Yeah, so it's a lot the same. However, they really need to protect themselves and the family that they are trying to create. So I counsel all of our same-sex couples to meet with a lawyer, and I usually direct them to a lawyer who is a member of ASRM,
American Society of Reproductive Medicine.
Correct, and so that it's someone who understands the rules both on the national level and also on the state level. So if you reach out to the legal group at ASRM, they will absolutely help you, and they have great resources. But there are different rules for different states on what you have to have in order to get both female partners on the birth certificate.
Right,
instance.
Which leads to the next point I wanted to talk about. Let's say one woman carries the pregnancy and the other woman wants to be a mother as well. Frequently, she will have no rights, or her rights depend on what they did beforehand to arrange this pregnancy. I believe that if women are married, it makes it a little easier that the other woman is on the birth certificate. Correct. Or registered as the mother with full parental rights. Yeah, that's correct, right?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. It makes it a lot easier. However, you do not have to be married in order to get both female names on the birth certificate. But there are going to be more stringent rules, and that's why you really need to consult a lawyer who is familiar with those.
You need a family lawyer in the state you are in, and you need to do all the preparation beforehand, so when that child is born, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, to make sure that partner gets parental rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it can get very, very tricky there. Another thing I read is that to really do it right, both partners should have separate representation. They should each have a lawyer, so that somebody can't come back and say, hey, I wasn't represented, or my lawyer had a conflict of interest. You might say, why do I need two lawyers? Well, that's the reason. So it gets real complicated, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah. And one should not rely on just the paperwork, the consent forms at the fertility clinic. Those are helpful in documenting, but they are frequently not enough. They're not enough for the courts to make these determinations.
Correct. There needs to be something that indicates the intent that you had in creating this child.
Yeah. So let's say we have two women, a lesbian couple, and I need to point this out and put a finer point on this. Let's say you even buy sperm. Let's say you've got safe sperm. You're doing home inseminations, which, by the way, are not as successful. But let's say they do that, and one woman gets pregnant. The partner cannot prove that the woman the pregnant woman could potentially be pregnant from intercourse with this guy, and you can't prove that it wasn't. So unless you go into this with all this documented, the other woman who's not carrying can get left out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I get from time to time court papers that are an affidavit saying, I, Gilbert Wilshire, Missouri Fertility, did do this insemination on this day with the intent of this and blah, 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 which is what the courts actually need to make sure that both partners can be full-fledged parents with full rights.
Right. But if you've done this at home and you don't have someone that can sign that affidavit, you could have a big problem. And one of the partners could end up not being recognized as a parent to this child.
Yeah. And then they don't realize that they very innocently did it. They don't have much money. They wanted to go the cheap route, but they got what they paid for. And potentially one partner gets the short end of the stick. That's very, very important to know. So I would suggest that the doing it right through a fertility clinic takes care of all these details, that there should be no surprises if you do end up being parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's now get a little more further complicated. If two men come in that want to have a child, they clearly don't have a uterus, they're going to have to find a gestational surrogate, or what I call a womb with a view. Nice little joke there. And so we already know there's going to be a gestational surrogate there. We're going to need to get eggs from somewhere. Then these two gentlemen have to figure out which one of their sperm they're going to use. So it gets even more complicated then. Give me some idea, what are the things a same-sex male couple has to do to have a pregnancy successfully, have a child successfully, and have them both given full parental rights?
Sure. So you're naturally going to have legal, but you're going to end up having a little bit more legal conversations than in the previous examples we've talked about. You're going to need a contract with the surrogate, and that gets very complicated. You have to have a contract with the eggs, whether you're buying them frozen from the bank or you're using a fresh egg donor. There would be a contract for that as well.
And occasionally the gestational carrier also were using her eggs as well. So
that can happen,
that can happen.
But
so
you would still have two contracts.
We'd have two contracts.
Yes.
So we can get the eggs usually from a different source, but sometimes the same woman. And these are different situations that require different contracts.
Right. No, absolutely. And then you have to think about the counseling. Anytime you're going through third-party reproduction for IVF, counseling is recommended and sometimes even required, depending on the situation.
Sure, we require it.
Right. So those things add up to the things that you don't think about when you're thinking, hey, I just want to have a baby. You don't think about the fact that you have to go through these separate things that are outside of the actual treatment cycle. But legal will be very important, but so will the counseling, to make sure that you've thought of all the questions and all the things that you want to put into the legal contracts. And you may have to do insurance on the surrogate as well, so that if something were to happen and the surrogate is in the hospital for several weeks or days, that they're covered as well. So there is a lot that goes into that.
You might say, well, she has her own health insurance. Well, health insurers are aware of this. And there's another question. They'll say, is this pregnancy yours? Is this your egg or whatnot? And they will carve that out. So you do have to have these riders. And also something that people don't fully appreciate. Let's say the surrogate is married. Well, we have to have buy-in from her husband as a stakeholder. It's not that we need his permission, but he's going to be there. He's the husband. He has to at least buy into this, and you need to document that. Yeah,
absolutely. He is part of the whole situation.
Right.
She is going to be pregnant for, hopefully the whole 9 months. Right. And he is going to be dealing with that as well. And there are times that the spouses can get quite attached, and in certain states where the rights are given to the surrogate, to the person who is delivering the baby, that can be very tricky. So you want to make sure that everyone involved is included in the legal and counseling process,
and the partner of the egg donor as well.
Correct.
So now you've got all these people involved you wouldn't necessarily assume are part of it.
Right.
Boy, that's complicated. And this is a good time to mention that in some states, including Missouri, the woman who delivers the child is the mother. It supersedes any agreements, and her name is on the birth certificate. But it's my understanding, and tell me if I'm describing this properly, that if we have the affidavits from us and all the paperwork and and whatnot, and the lawyers, this is when the surrogate is getting closer to term and it's looking like, hey, there's probably a baby coming. They go to a judge. You get something called a predetermination for adoption. I think that's pretty close to the right name.
Correct.
The right descriptive word for it. And adoption papers are drawn up ahead of time, pre-approved by this judge. So when the child is born, and the birth certificate may say the mother is the delivering woman, but then there's immediately, the paperwork is immediately signed for adoption. And that way the intended parents go home with the baby usually.
Yes. So Missouri is one of a few states that see it that way. And it is unfortunate that is an extra hoop that they would have to jump through. That's why it's so important to know what the legal ramifications of your treatment cycle are in the state that you plan on delivering in.
Yeah, we could transfer an embryo in a woman here in our clinic in Missouri, but she has traveled from Kansas. And in Kansas, I believe the laws are different. And the biological, the person whose sperm or egg you have used is the parent. It gets a little more complicated. Well, now we have an egg donor from Minnesota.
Right, exactly.
The carrier from Kansas. We've got a clinic in Missouri. You can see this can get very, very complicated.
Yeah, that's why it's always important to seek legal counsel.
Yeah, so if you have same-sex couple, and particularly two guys who need more extended help and extensive networks here, that we come together and do all the homework prior to attempting this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what are some other pitfalls that we have seen or that we can anticipate with non-traditional reproduction that I haven't talked about yet?
I mean, I think some of the first issues that they may face are there are some clinics that won't even treat someone looking to do a non-traditional cycle.
That's right. I know there's areas of Missouri where same-sex women will come here because they cannot get donor insemination services in their neck of the woods.
Right. And and it is unfortunate that you have to have that kind of travel and that kind of expense added on to something that's already a fairly decent expense. But luckily there are ways that we can help alleviate some of that by maybe having them do some monitoring closer to them and that kind of thing. So we help in any way that we can, but it is unfortunate that not everyone will help these couples.
Yeah, we can't force them to. All we can say is our doors are open. Like I'd say, I think God loves everybody, and we try to give everyone the care that they request. So it's not unreasonable. Now that we're beginning to wind down this conversation, there are 3 more points that I would like to add. First of all, is when you're using agencies, sometimes you'll have a donor who has. The donor will receive compensation for her work. You're not really buying her eggs. You're buying her efforts, her time. You're paying her for doing the process, whether she makes 1 egg or 20 eggs. And apparently there are cases where you may have money in an escrow account, and it sounds like everything's going well, and all of a sudden the baby's born and the escrow account is gone, and this This middleman has evaporated and gone away. So if you are going to use an agency, you should use an agency with a track record and somebody that has, a reputation, so you can be confident your funds aren't going to disappear.
Oh, absolutely. It is important that you find a agency that is well connected in our field. Again, I would lean on ASRM in order to locate those types of agencies. They can help a lot with any type of complaints that they've heard of said agencies. They can really help you to understand which ones are there for the long run, which ones are new and may not make it. So it is important to do your homework and to do your research. A lot of clinics have already done that research, so definitely talk to your clinic. They can usually point you in the right direction to the resources that you need.
Yeah, we have some agencies we have many years of experience with that we trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing that is kind of a surprise to me is that there are tax implications and ramifications of these expenses and having a baby, and whether it's born on December 31st or July or January 1st, it changes the whole year. There's tax averaging. You can average some of these expenses over the course of 2 years. There may be benefits from putting all the expenses into 1 year and whatnot. So there can be big financial ramifications that you might even want to bring an accountant in to help you with.
Yes, I would say that if you're looking at the example we were talking about with doing IVF with a surrogate and an egg donor, I would say that you definitely want to find out what way is best. And your accountant will probably have questions on how this is all going to work. Because let's say that you do let's say we do an egg retrieval in December, but we're not going to do a transfer until January. Right. Well, if you pay for it all in December, does it matter when we bill it out and actually use the money, or is it just when you paid for the money? Like, how detailed does that itemized statement need to be? Because if I haven't done the service, I can't put the money towards a service we haven't completed yet. So yes, it's definitely important that, especially if you're doing the higher ticket treatments, you need to consult your accountant and see what questions they may have, and a way that will do this in a financially beneficial way for you.
Yeah, because it could be thousands of dollars one way or the other.
Correct.
And the final thing I want to emphasize is that you can get typical contracts or boilerplate contracts for these various services on the internet and online, but they do not take into account what state you are in. So they might serve as a starting point, but they should never be used as your final contract. And you should always, and I'm just going to say this again, you should always find an attorney, a lawyer in your state with family law experience, with the rules and regulations and the laws that affect you, because they are so wide, they're so disparate and different and widespread, very different wherever you go, that you really need a lawyer who knows your situation and your state.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that when you're looking at these places online, even if they do look at your state and they ask you what state you're in so that they use the right set of rules, these are not people that are in those courtrooms that are dealing with these matters head on. Every judge is going to read a contract a different way and interpret things a little bit differently than the next person. And so I think it's important to be working with an actual attorney who knows how these things are actually being relayed in the court system that is taking place in the state that you need.
Yeah, the current interpretations.
Right. I think it's very important that you're dealing with someone who knows and is up to date with those interpretations as things have been reinterpreted lately.
Right. And I'm going to end on international reproduction. With the war in Ukraine, I hear on the news that there's women who are delivering babies that weren't intended to be their babies, but it's the middle of a war. How do you get the baby out? It'd just be a nightmare. There's gestational surrogates that you can use in other countries. That's changing all the time. I know India now frowns upon it. Now there's women who go to Nepal. And how do you? So the international law can get incredibly complicated. The only experience I have is women who go to, for example, Eastern Europe, where IVF might be cheaper, not as effective, but cheaper. Cheaper, and they go there, they get the eggs from, let's say, an Eastern European woman. Well, as long as they can get out of the country and skedaddle back, they're pretty protected. They're protected by an ocean and some international laws. But I'm not. I just want to say that I don't know much about it. I can't comment, authoritatively about this, but I can just say that it can get very, very tricky. Wars break out, pandemics occur, laws change, governments change. And it gets very, very complicated once you go international.
Oh, it absolutely does. And so you will definitely want to make sure that you have the right counsel for sure.
Absolutely. Well, April, this has been a very valuable discussion. Thank you so much for your insight. Thank you for all the hard work you do for Missouri Fertility. And I really appreciate your knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
What a pleasure. Bye-bye.